They laughed at my farmer husband the moment we entered the ballroom. Not loudly, quietly, cruelly. The kind of laughter hidden
This
behind
is
champagne
unacceptable.
glasses and
Look at
fake
page 5.
smiles.
Who
Crystal
approved this
chandeliers
expenditure?
glowed above wealthy guests,
We need to
dressed in
discuss this
silk and
calmly.
diamonds, while my husband Daniel stood beside me in a simple black suit, his rough hands marked by years of hard work under the sun. My sister Vanessa smirked the second she saw him. "So this is the farmer?" she asked, as if the word itself was an insult. Her husband Richard chuckled. "I thought Elena was joking about moving to the countryside." Around them, people whispered and laughed softly. Daniel stayed calm. That only irritated them more. My father eventually approached us, cold and proud as always. "People here build empires," he told Daniel. "You grow vegetables." I felt humiliated, but Daniel only replied quietly, "Everyone depends on the people who grow food." The room fell silent for a moment before the mocking resumed. Then, near midnight, everything changed. The sound of helicopter blades thundered outside through the rain. Guests rushed toward the windows as a helicopter landed in the estate courtyard. Men in dark suits stepped out, followed by an older executive carrying a leather case. He entered the ballroom and asked loudly, "Where is Mr. Daniel Reyes?" Silence swallowed the room. Daniel stepped forward calmly. "I'm Daniel Reyes." The executive shook his hand respectfully. "Sir, the acquisition has been finalized. Congratulations on becoming majority owner of AgriNova Global." Gasps exploded across the ballroom. AgriNova was worth billions. My father turned pale. Vanessa stared in shock. Richard looked like he couldn't breathe. Daniel, the poor farmer they mocked all night, was one of the richest men in the country. Suddenly, everyone wanted his attention. People who ignored him minutes earlier now smiled nervously and offered handshakes. But Daniel simply looked around the room and said quietly, "Interesting how respect appears the moment money enters the conversation." Nobody could answer him. Then he revealed something even worse. He had secretly been buying the surrounding land to stop wealthy estate owners from stealing water, resources from struggling farming communities downstream. Families had suffered for years while rich people kept their gardens green. My father was involved. The room grew colder with every word. "You planned this?" my father asked shakily. Daniel shook his head. "No, I just gave people the chance to reveal who they really are." Before leaving, an elderly waiter accidentally dropped a tray of glasses. While wealthy guests stepped back in annoyance, Daniel immediately knelt to help the old man clean the broken glass. "Careful," he said gently. "You'll hurt yourself." That moment said more about him than the helicopter ever could. As we walked toward the helicopter through the storm, my father stopped us. "I misjudged you," he admitted quietly. Daniel looked at him calmly. "No," he replied. "You judged exactly what you value." Then we flew into the night, leaving behind a ballroom full of shattered pride and silent regret. Because sometimes the man everyone laughs at is the only one in the room with real dignity. The storm followed us long after the ballroom disappeared beneath the clouds. Rain streaked across the helicopter windows, while the city lights flickered below like fading embers. Daniel sat beside me in silence, his expression unreadable, one hand resting calmly against the leather seat, as though the chaos we'd left behind meant nothing to him. But I knew him well enough to see the exhaustion hidden beneath his calm. "You should have told me," I whispered finally. Daniel looked out into the darkness for a moment before answering. "Would it have changed anything between us?" I shook my head immediately. "No, that's why I married you," he said softly. Those words settled deep inside me. Because he was right. I had fallen in love with the man who repaired fences before sunrise, who stayed awake during storms to protect his crops, who gave food away to struggling neighbors, even when we barely had enough ourselves. Not the billionaire hidden behind headlines and corporations. The helicopter landed nearly an hour later, beside a massive property surrounded by endless fields. glowing silver beneath the moonlight. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't another marble palace built to impress strangers. It was land. Acres and acres of living soil, stretching farther than I could see. Workers moved through the fields even at that hour, checking irrigation systems after the storm. Daniel stepped out first, breathing in the cold night air like a man finally returning home. But before we could walk toward the farmhouse, headlights appeared in the distance. Fast, aggressive. Black SUVs tore down the dirt road toward us, spraying mud into the air. Daniel's expression hardened instantly. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The vehicle stopped hard near the barn. Richard stepped out first, soaked by rain, fury burning across his face. Vanessa followed behind him, pale and shaken. My father emerged last. He looked older somehow, smaller. "You lied to all of us," Richard snapped. Daniel remained calm. "No, you assumed. You humiliated us," Richard shouted. "No," Daniel replied coldly. "You humiliated yourselves the moment you decided someone's worth depended on money." Richard lunged forward angrily, but my father stopped him. Then, for the first time that night, my father looked directly at me instead of Daniel. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "you knew about the investigation?" "What investigation?" I asked. Silence fell. Vanessa looked away nervously. My father swallowed hard. "Agrinova has been gathering evidence for months. Illegal water diversion, fraud, bribery." He looked toward Daniel. "You're turning this family over to the authorities." The wind moved heavily through the fields around us. Daniel's voice stayed steady. "I gave everyone opportunities to stop. Nobody did." Vanessa suddenly burst into tears. "We didn't know it would destroy entire villages," she cried. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You knew enough." Those words hit harder than shouting ever could. My father stepped forward slowly. "Please," he said, "whatever happens to me, protect Vanessa." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. "Did you ever protect the families who lost everything?" My father couldn't answer. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again across the dark fields, and for the first time in his life, the powerful man who once controlled every room he entered stood speechless before a farmer who valued truth more than fear. By morning, the scandal had spread across the entire country. Every news channel carried the same story. Powerful landowners accused of draining water from struggling farming regions, while surrounding communities collapsed under drought and debt. My father's face appeared beside headlines filled with words like corruption, investigation, and criminal inquiry. Vanessa locked herself inside one of the guest rooms at the farmhouse, unable to face the world outside. Richard disappeared before sunrise. He left without a word. Daniel wasn't surprised. "Men like him stay loyal to comfort," he said quietly while standing on the porch overlooking the fields. "Not people." Workers moved across the farmland below us as the sun slowly climbed through the fog. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Daniel still walked the fields that morning, still checked irrigation lines, still spoke to workers by name. Watching him unsettled me in a strange way. Billionaires usually chased attention, power, control. But Daniel seemed most at peace, carrying mud on his boots beneath an open sky. That afternoon, government investigators arrived at the farmhouse. Black vehicles lined the dirt road, while agents carried boxes of files into a temporary office near the barn. I watched my father step out slowly from one of the cars. His shoulders looked heavier than I'd ever seen them. Gone was the proud man from the ballroom. In his place stood someone finally crushed beneath the weight of his own choices. Vanessa ran toward him immediately, tears filling her eyes. "Dad, tell them it isn't true," she begged. He couldn't. That silence answered everything. Danielle stood nearby, calm but distant, as investigators questioned people one by one. Then an older farmer approached the property gates, carrying a worn hat in his hands. His face looked weathered by years of hardship. Behind him stood a little girl, no older than 10. Daniel walked over immediately. "Mr. Carter," he said softly. The old farmer removed his cap slowly. "They told me you stopped the water shutdown," he whispered. Daniel nodded once. The man's eyes filled with tears. "My grandson almost died last summer," he said. "We lost everything." The little girl beside him stepped forward shyly and handed Daniel a tiny bundle of wildflowers. "Mama said to thank you," she whispered. Daniel took the flowers carefully, like they were something priceless. And in that moment, standing there beneath the open sky with dirt beneath his boots and tears in an old farmer's eyes, I finally understood why he fought so hard. This was never about revenge. It was about protecting people no one powerful ever bothered to see. My father watched the entire moment from a distance. His expression broke completely, because for the first time he saw the true cost of the empire he spent his life building. That night, the farmhouse felt strangely quiet. The reporters had finally disappeared, and the investigators were gone until morning. Only the sound of wind moving through the fields filled the darkness outside. I found Daniel sitting alone on the porch steps, staring across the farmland beneath the moonlight. The little bundle of wildflowers still rested beside him. "You could have destroyed them years ago," I said softly. Daniel stayed silent for a moment. "I almost did," he admitted. "Then why didn't you?" He leaned forward slowly, his hands clasped together. "Because anger destroys people differently than greed does. I didn't want revenge to become the reason I woke up every morning." His voice sounded tired now, human, vulnerable in a way I had never heard before. "When my father lost the farm," he continued quietly, "nobody helped us. Wealthy investors bought the surrounding water rights, and families like mine slowly disappeared. Some men drank themselves to death. Others left and never came back." He looked out across the dark fields. "I promised myself that if I ever had power, I would never use it the way they did." The truth hit me hard. Daniel didn't build Agrinova for money alone. He built it because he knew exactly what it felt like to watch good people suffer, while powerful men protected profits. Suddenly, headlights appeared again near the road, but this time only one vehicle approached. Vanessa stepped out slowly when he stopped. She looked exhausted, her makeup washed away by tears and sleeplessness. For the first time in years, she looked less like a socialite and more like my sister. She walked toward Danielle carefully. "Richard took everything," she said quietly. "The accounts, the properties. He left me to face this alone." Danielle didn't react. Vanessa's voice trembled. "I spent my whole life thinking money meant security." She laughed bitterly through tears. "Turns out it just tells you who disappears first when things fall apart." Silence stretched between them. Then Vanessa looked directly at Daniel. "Why are you still helping us after everything we said to you?" Daniel picked up the small wildflowers beside him. "Because kindness means nothing when it's only given to people who deserve it." Vanessa broke down crying. And for the first time in years, there were no cameras, no diamonds, no ballroom masks left to hide behind. Just people standing in the ruins of their own choices, finally forced to face who they had become. The arrest began 3 days later. News helicopters circled above the city, while reporters crowded outside courthouse steps waiting for powerful names to fall. Business executives, politicians, and investors who once filled my father's ballroom now avoided cameras and lawyers alike. Some blamed one another publicly. Others vanished completely. But no amount of money could stop the investigations anymore. The evidence was too large, too real. My father sat quietly at the farmhouse kitchen table the morning agents arrived for him. The proud man who once controlled entire rooms now looked hollow beneath the early sunlight pouring through the windows. Vanessa stood beside him crying softly while officers waited outside. "I never thought it would go this far," my father admitted quietly. Daniel leaned against the doorway. silent for a long moment before speaking. That's the danger of living too far away from consequences, he said. My father looked down at his hands. I told myself everyone benefited from the system. Did the farmers benefit? Daniel asked calmly. No answer came, just silence heavy enough to fill the room. Before leaving, my father finally turned toward me. Tears filled his eyes for the first time in my life. I spent years teaching you to chase status, he whispered, but you were the only one wise enough to walk away from it. Then he looked at Daniel. Take care of her. Daniel nodded once. I already do. As the officers escorted my father outside, reporters exploded with questions beyond the gates. Cameras flashed endlessly, while the farmhouse stood quiet behind them all, untouched by the chaos. Vanessa collapsed into a chair after the cars disappeared down the road. Everything's gone, she whispered. Daniel looked out across the fields where workers continued harvesting beneath the afternoon sun. Not everything, he said softly. She frowned through tears. What's left? Daniel turned toward her calmly. The chance to become someone better than who you were yesterday. Those words stayed with all of us long after the news vans disappeared, because sometimes losing the life you built is the only way to finally see the truth about yourself. Months later, the fields were alive again. Water flowed freely through the rebuilt irrigation channels, and small farming towns that once stood on the edge of collapse slowly began to recover. Children played beside rivers that had nearly dried up. Markets reopened. Families returned home. And for the first time in years, hope replaced fear across the valley. Daniel never appeared on magazine covers despite reporters constantly chasing him. He refused interviews, ignored television offers, and spent most mornings exactly where he always had, walking the fields before sunrise with dirt on his boots and quiet in his heart. One evening I stood beside him, near the edge of the farm, as the sun melted gold across the horizon. Workers laughed in the distance, while the wind moved softly through endless rows of crops. Peace had finally returned. Do you ever regret it? I asked quietly. Exposing all of them? Daniel looked toward the horizon for a long moment before answering. No, he said softly, but I regret how many people suffer, while powerful men convince themselves they deserve more than everyone else. His words settled heavily in the evening air. Nearby, Vanessa helped prepare food for several farming families visiting the property. She was different now, quieter, kinder. The woman who once mocked dirt beneath someone's fingernails no longer cared about designer dresses or ballroom invitations. Pain had humbled her. Truth had changed her. I rested my head against Daniel's shoulder as the last light faded across the fields. You know, I whispered, they laughed at you because they thought being a farmer made you small. Daniel smiled faintly. People who've never planted anything don't understand how much strength it takes to grow life from the ground. In the distance, thunder rolled softly beyond the mountains, but this time it didn't sound threatening. It sounded cleansing, like the world itself had finally washed something corrupt away. And standing there beside the man they once mocked, I realized something I would never forget. Wealth can buy attention, power can buy silence, but dignity has to be earned. And sometimes the richest soul in the room is the one with mud on his hands instead of gold on his wrist.